It's book 13. Odysseus finishes his story for the Phaeacians, and he's back in the present. Once again, he appeals to them for help. And once again, the Phaeacians and their king agree to help him get back to Ithaca. Poseidon overhears this and is enraged. He demands that Zeus do something about this. Zeus favors Odysseus, so he allows Poseidon to take it out on the Phaeacians for helping him. In book 14, Odysseus at last reaches home. In fact, he's dropped off there when he's asleep by the Phaeacians, and when he wakes up, he can't even recognize his own home because it's been obscured in mist by Athena. Athena appears to him as a shepherd, and he doesn't reveal to her his true identity. And that's when she transforms back into her goddess form and praises him for not doing so. He asks where Athena had been all this time when he had been stranded on that island with Calypso. She explains that she feared Poseidon's wrath, but then she clues him into what's been happening at home with all the suitors. She transforms him into a beggar, and there he encounters Eumaeus, a trusty old swineherd. Odysseus, disguised as a beggar, tests Eumaeus' loyalty by making up a story about how Odysseus himself once gave this beggar his own coat to stay warm. This story closely mirrors Odysseus' own life, and through it we can see that he's expressing humility and sadness for having left behind his family, and that he sees a lot of virtue in piety. Eumaeus is delighted by this story, and he passes the test of loyalty with flying colors, putting his own cloak around this beggar, Odysseus. The Phaeacians' punishment by Poseidon is another example of vengeance, since they've been forewarned about Odysseus' problems with the god. Another thing we see going on here is loyalty and hospitality working hand in hand. We can see at this point in the book how hospitality shows the true colors and virtues of characters almost right away, based on how hospitable and open-minded they are towards guests and visitors in whatever form. In book 15, the narrative shifts back to Telemachus. He's greeted by Athena, who warns him of the suitors' plot to murder him, and tells him that he should return to Ithaca, but advises him about how he and Pisistratus can avoid an ambush. At this point, the action is beginning to converge around Ithaca once again. We're building up towards that big climax. Pisistratus and Telemachus notice an important omen: an eagle carrying a goose. The noble and the strong, this foreshadows, will soon crush the weak. In book 16, Odysseus gives Eumaeus yet another loyalty test and a plan to beg at the palace. Eumaeus advises Odysseus to hang back and wait for Telemachus to return home. Odysseus agrees to this, and in the meantime, at Eumaeus' home, asks Eumaeus to tell him his life story. Meanwhile, Telemachus arrives back in Ithaca and avoids the trap set by the suitors because of Athena's advice. Athena then advises him to go to Eumaeus' home, where he encounters Odysseus disguised as a younger version of himself. Telemachus is shocked and believes Odysseus to be a god. Odysseus reveals his true form, and there, at last, Telemachus is face to face with the man he hasn't seen since he was a baby, his father. Athena transforms Odysseus back into a beggar. Now, only Telemachus knows his true identity. Back at the palace, the suitors continue their plot to assassinate Telemachus. Amphinomus, one of these suitors, says that they need to hold off and let the gods' plans reveal themselves. The other suitors agree that that's what they should do. In this chapter, we really can see how much the characters have grown and changed. Odysseus is practicing the restraint that was laid out for him in the land of the dead. Telemachus is now truly side by side with his father, a real heir to the throne of his powers and strength. Eumaeus's revealing of his life story shows how fate can shape a life and how privilege can easily be taken away. The major theme of the gods interceding in the fate of mortals is once again brought to the forefront, as we see at this point that both Odysseus and Telemachus are completely dependent on Athena to carry out their plan, but that their plan is one that's going to require them to reach their greatest, strongest, most powerful, unified potential. Truly, the gods and the mortals are working together to make fate turn into privilege. In Book 17, Odysseus finally, after 20 years, returns home to the palace that still belongs to him. He goes with Eumaeus, and while he's still disguised as a beggar, he's prepared to figure out exactly what's going on so that he can wreak his vengeance. Telemachus has gone ahead, and he's brought with him a prophet. And when they arrive at the palace, they tell Penelope that Odysseus is coming home. Penelope can't believe the news. Once Odysseus arrives, he meets up with Telemachus, and Telemachus tells him to go around and meet the different suitors as a beggar. This will help him discern who's really the worst. Many of the suitors are kind to Odysseus in disguise, but one, Antinous, loses his cool and throws a chair at him. Odysseus tells him that surely the gods will notice and have their revenge. In this way, we see justice, a major theme, rearing its head. Telemachus and Odysseus are figuring out who should be spared and who shouldn't, who are the worst of the worst and who aren't, who are the ones who will feel the wrath of vengeance the most. In Book 18, Odysseus, still disguised as a beggar, is in the palace, and now another beggar has showed up. Antinous, who did not take kindly to Odysseus being there in the first place, eggs the two on to fight each other. Odysseus reluctantly agrees, but holds back his full strength to keep from hurting the other beggar. He still wins the fight easily. He goes on to tell another one of the suitors, Amphinomus, that bad things are coming, and this is just a sign of the violence that will befall them all. He then yells at some of the maidservants for not looking after their mistress, Penelope. Some of the maidservants talk back, and Odysseus threatens them. Despite all this, he doesn't hurt anybody, at least not yet. This is some major foreshadowing, not just of the vengeance to come, but it also shows a lot of how Odysseus and Telemachus have grown as characters, both using restraint, reining themselves in, and biding their time. Another major theme in Book 18 is homecoming. After all, Odysseus has finally made it back to his palace. However, deception is still majorly happening. Telemachus is not telling his mother that his father is home. And Odysseus hasn't revealed his identity to anyone yet, except his son. These two themes work really well together, but it's a challenge because these characters are going to have to reveal their true intentions if they want to be, well, themselves when they come home. It's Book 19, and the suitors have all retired for the evening. Odysseus, still in disguise, and Telemachus hide all their weapons, some major foreshadowing of the attack they're planning. Odysseus finally meets with Penelope, his long-suffering wife. She doesn't recognize him, of course, but someone does. Euryclea, his childhood nurse. She recognizes a scar on Odysseus from all the way back to when he was a kid. Odysseus makes her swear not to tell anyone that it's him. Euryclea promises that she can tell Odysseus which maidservants have been disloyal. Odysseus says he'll find out himself. Penelope tells Odysseus, who she thinks is a beggar, that she's planning a contest for the suitors to finally figure out which one will get her hand in marriage. It's a bow and arrow contest, including stringing Odysseus' mighty weapon of choice. Odysseus, in disguise, lets her know that her husband will be home before the contest can even start. Penelope, rattled, goes up to her room where she hides herself away, weeping. In Book 20, Odysseus, a guest in his own palace, stays up late thinking about the revenge he'll seek on the suitors in the morning. Athena appears to him again, telling him that not only will he be victorious over the suitors, but over any of their families should they themselves try to seek revenge. However, he overhears Penelope in the other room weeping and offering a prayer that she die if Odysseus doesn't return. He himself offers a prayer to Zeus, who sends down a clap of thunder in response. The next day, Theoclymenus, a seer, warns the suitors of a dark vision he's had. Blood, mist, ghosts, the kinds of things you'd see in the land of the dead. The suitors, they don't believe him. They laugh him off. They continue their revelry. Telemachus, in fact, shows that he's become bolder and braver by scolding them for their behavior. However, only one suitor believes the vision, Amphimenus, who sees an eagle flying overhead with a dove in its talons, a sign of things to come. This image is not just foreshadowing for the coming slaughter, but also an image we've seen throughout the book, that predatory, strong eagle with its claws clutching prey, a dove, just like the suitors, victims of forces beyond their control.